I thank God all the time for all the people that have been part of my life and career that have helped me get here and maintain this all this time. And thank you.
He sold 75 million records. He wrote a song that made an entire nation weep. He stood on stages in front of crowds that would have followed him anywhere. And now, at 67 years old, Alan Jackson is walking away. Not entirely by choice. The disease slowly stealing his ability to move freely is the same one he watched destroy his father's hands decades ago. His farewell tour, Last Call, One More for the Road, carries a weight that no press release has fully captured. And the real story behind this goodbye runs far deeper and far darker than anything the headlines have bothered to explain.
Yeah, you know, a lot of songs are about, most songs are about love, and most of them about lost love or heartache. I suppose in any genre of music, pretty much. That's the.
When George Jones, Merle Haggard, and Johnny Cash defined country music, nobody worried about losing it. The genre felt permanent, unshakable, built from something too real and too deeply American to ever be replaced by something manufactured. But that era faded slowly, like a fire nobody bothered to keep feeding, and two men became its final defenders, George Strait and Alan Jackson. Two artists who watched Nashville transform around them and refused to transform with it. Their fans held on to them the way people hold on to anything they know they're losing, tightly and with the quiet desperation of someone who already knows how the story ends. Now Strait is long retired, and Jackson has just announced his farewell. For millions of people across this country, this isn't just a concert tour ending. It feels like a funeral for the real thing itself, and the grief is completely legitimate. Alan Jackson was born on December 15, 1958 in Noonan, Georgia, in a small house his grandfather had built himself right beside the railroad tracks. He was the only boy in a family of 5 children, the lone son surrounded by 4 sisters, raised in a tight and loud working-class home where personal space was never a concept anyone had the luxury of caring about. His father, Eugene, was a mechanic, a man defined entirely by calloused hands, motor oil permanently worked into his skin, and a dignity that had absolutely nothing to do with the size of his paycheck. Eugene taught his son early that honest work was its own reward, regardless of what it paid or who noticed. Alan's mother made sure every single one of her children was in church every Sunday, without exception. And it was there, standing in a crowded pew singing gospel hymns, that people first turned around to look at the Jackson boy. Something in the way he carried a melody made the whole room stop. That gift was fully formed before he ever touched a guitar string. By his teenage years, Alan had saved enough from odd jobs to buy a beat-up second-hand guitar, and from that point forward, every spare hour belonged to it. He learned entirely by ear, sitting alone and copying country songs coming through the radio, working out chord progressions through pure trial and error, building calluses on fingers that had never touched a pick before. Nobody in the Jackson family had music industry connections. Nobody had a roadmap for how a quiet kid from Noonan, Georgia was supposed to turn a second-hand guitar into a career. But Alan didn't need a roadmap. He just needed enough time with the instrument until his hands knew the strings the same way his father's hands knew an engine, instinctively and completely. He played local honky-tonks on weekends for crowds that weren't always paying attention, sharpening something that didn't have a name yet but was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. And through all of it, there was Denise. They had grown up within miles of each other in Noonan, high school sweethearts who married in 1979 with no money, no industry connections, and no guarantee that any of this would ever amount to anything real. But Denise believed in Alan's talent with a quiet certainty that never wavered, even during the stretches when nothing was working and every sign pointed toward giving up. She wasn't just his wife, she was the first person who truly saw what he was capable of before the rest of the world had any idea he existed. And she was about to prove it in the most unexpected way imaginable. Denise Jackson never waited for doors to open. She walked up and knocked on them herself. While working as a flight attendant in Atlanta, she spotted Glenn Campbell moving through the airport terminal and approached him without a single moment of hesitation. She told him her husband was a serious singer who deserved his shot, and she asked straight out what Alan needed to do to break into Nashville. Campbell reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and told her to send Alan his way. That one moment, a flight attendant's boldness and a legend's generosity in an airport corridor became the spark that lit everything. Alan and Denise packed up their entire lives and moved to Nashville with almost nothing, chasing a future built on the back of a business card from a man they had met completely by chance. It was the most important 30 seconds of both their lives, and neither of them knew it yet. Nashville did not roll out a welcome mat. Alan spent years working in the mailroom at the Nashville network just to stay physically close to an industry that hadn't decided to care about him yet. His demo tapes sat on producers' desks and collected dust. The phone rarely rang with good news. The rejections came in waves, and the money was almost non-existent through most of it. Denise kept working. Alan kept writing. Neither of them discussed quitting because neither of them considered it a real option. Eventually, Arista Nashville took a chance on the unknown kid from Georgia, and his debut album Here in the Real World climbed the charts with the kind of momentum that felt less like a launch and more like an inevitability. The quiet boy from the railroad house had arrived, and the arrival was permanent. When Alan Jackson released Don't Rock the Jukebox in 1991, it landed less like a song and more like a direct challenge thrown at every executive in Nashville who believed country music needed to sound like pop radio to survive. He was drawing a line clearly and publicly, daring the industry to cross it. What followed was one of the most dominant stretches any country artist has ever produced. Chattahoochee became the kind of song every American seemed to know regardless of whether they considered themselves country fans. Drive was a quiet tribute to his father and the rural Georgia childhood that shaped everything about him, so specific and so honest that it somehow became universal. Gone Country took a sharp look at the flood of pop artists trying to cash in on the genre's commercial success, delivered with just enough humor that you almost missed how cutting the criticism actually was. 35 #1 singles, 75 million records sold, 16 CMA awards, 2 Grammys. The numbers were extraordinary by any standard. But what truly separated Alan from every other hitmaker of his era wasn't the trophies, it was the fact that through all of it, he never once tried to be anything other than exactly who he already was. In an industry built on reinvention and image management, that kind of stubborn authenticity was practically revolutionary. Fame has a specific and well-documented way of testing the people who weren't built for its side effects. The relentless touring schedule, the months away from home, the constant stream of people telling you yes while nobody tells you no. It creates a version of reality that has very little to do with actual life. And it cracked something in Alan Jackson's marriage that couldn't be quietly managed or privately resolved. He was unfaithful to Denise, the woman who had approached Glenn Campbell in an airport and changed the entire direction of his life. The woman who had moved to Nashville on pure faith and supported him through years of silence from an industry that hadn't discovered him yet. The woman who had given him everything before he had anything to give back. The betrayal was as devastating as it was public, with tabloids dissecting the most painful moment of their private lives, while Denise processed a wound that most people would never have found a way back from. Alan knew exactly what he had done and exactly what it had cost, and he had no defense worth offering. What saved the marriage wasn't counseling or compromise or a carefully negotiated fresh start. It was faith, specifically Denise's. She turned toward God with an intensity and seriousness that surprised even the people closest to her, finding in that relationship the strength to forgive something that most people would consider permanently unforgivable. She eventually wrote a book called It's All About Him, and the title wasn't referring to Alan. It was about surrendering her pain to something larger than herself and discovering that peace existed on the other side of the worst thing that had ever happened to her. Their reconciliation became one of country music's quietest and most remarkable survival stories. But it was built entirely on her grace, and anyone paying attention understood that clearly. Years later, another blow would land when their youngest daughter Maddie lost her husband Ben in a tragic boating accident barely a year after their wedding. Alan stood beside his daughter in that grief, helpless in the particular and devastating way that only a father can be helpless, present, loving, and completely unable to fix the thing that was broken. On September 11, 2001, Alan Jackson sat in front of his television and watched the world he recognized collapse in real time. Like every other American that morning, he was stunned into a stillness that had no language attached to it. But while most people stayed paralyzed in that silence, the songwriter in him slowly began reaching for words. Not political words or declarative words or words designed to make a statement, just honest ones. By the end of that terrible day, he had written most of Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning. He performed it weeks later at the CMA Awards with no advance notice and no promotion. Just a man, a guitar, and a song the audience had never heard before. By the second verse, people were crying openly. By the final note, the entire auditorium was undone. Industry veterans who had witnessed thousands of performances sat in tears at the simple, unadorned truth of what Alan Jackson had put into words. It won CMA Song of the Year and became something far beyond a country hit. It became a national document of collective grief, proof that a single honest voice could still reach an entire nation exactly where it was hurting. By the early 2010s, Bro Country had completed its takeover of the airwaves. Steel guitars disappeared from arrangements, fiddles became a relic, party anthems about trucks, tailgates, and cold beer replaced songs about real people navigating real lives, and everything started blurring together into one endless manufactured summer that had nothing to do with what country music had actually been built on. Radio stations that had once played Alan Jackson's music regularly stopped returning calls. Award shows shifted their attention entirely toward younger acts, generating social media engagement rather than substance. The fans who had grown up on traditional country music felt erased, like the genre they had supported their entire lives had simply decided they were no longer the audience worth speaking to. Alan could have adapted. He could have hired younger writers, added electronic production, and chased the streaming metrics the industry now valued above everything else. He refused every single part of that. It cost him radio play and mainstream visibility, but it earned him something no label could manufacture: the absolute and unshakable loyalty of every fan who still believed country music should actually sound like country music. Long before Alan received his own diagnosis, he had already spent years watching Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease dismantle his father from the inside out. Eugene Jackson, the mechanic, the man whose calloused hands had rebuilt engines and taught Alan that dignity came from honest labor, began losing strength and sensation in his fingers and feet. The decline was gradual and completely without mercy. The hands that had defined his entire identity slowly lost their ability to grip the tools that had given his life its shape and meaning. Alan watched every stage of that deterioration, knowing there was a genuine possibility he carried the same genetic condition in his own blood. CMT is hereditary, progressive, and currently without a cure. It attacks the peripheral nerves controlling movement and sensation, and once it begins, nothing stops it from continuing. When Alan's own diagnosis came, it confirmed what he had quietly feared for years. The disease that had taken his father's hands was now coming for him. Alan has spoken openly about the self-consciousness that began creeping into his performances, the awareness of his balance shifting, the fear of stumbling in front of crowds who came to celebrate him. For a man who had always carried himself with an effortless and unshowy confidence on stage, that loss of physical certainty was its own particular kind of grief. His farewell tour, Last Call, One More for the Road, is the answer his body has been forcing him toward for years. But Denise is still beside him, the same woman who walked up to Glenn Campbell in an airport, the same woman who moved to Nashville on faith, the same woman who found grace when she had every right to walk away. Whatever this final chapter brings, Alan Jackson will not face it without her. And for a man who learned early that love means surviving the hardest things life throws at you, that might be the only thing that matters now. Alan Jackson never set out to become a symbol. He just wanted to play guitar, write honest songs, and connect with the people who needed them. But somewhere across 35 number ones and 75 million records and one song performed on a stage that made an entire country cry, he became exactly that, a symbol of everything real country music stood for and everything the industry spent decades trying to replace. His farewell isn't simply one man stepping away from a stage. It's the closing of a chapter that millions of ordinary Americans lived their actual lives inside of. And if his career proved anything at all, it's that authenticity doesn't need a trend or a drum machine or an image consultant to survive. It just needs someone stubborn and honest enough to keep showing up and telling the truth, no matter what it costs them.